My family always said I'd never make it on my own. They told me I was too fragile, too inexperienced, too sentimental, too stubborn, every excuse they could think of to keep me dependent, or to make themselves feel superior. Growing up, I heard it so much that sometimes I almost believed it, especially during the weeks when money was tight and I felt like I was drowning under responsibilities that no one else seemed to care about. But I made it. I rented my first apartment, balanced bills and work, learned to cook more than just pasta and frozen meals, and somehow started building a life that I could be proud of. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I learned how to take care of myself and make decisions without waiting for someone to validate them. I learned how to sleep at night knowing I had done my best that day, no matter how small that best was. I was proud, and I felt strong. I didn't need them. I didn't need their approval. And I didn't miss the constant criticism or the passive-aggressive comments that used to follow every attempt I made at independence. I liked the quiet. I liked the control. I liked feeling like I had finally figured out my own rhythm, even if it meant feeling a little lonely sometimes. Then one Friday morning, everything changed. I was making breakfast, humming along to a playlist I'd downloaded the night before, when my doorbell rang. That was unusual. Almost never anyone visited me. I frowned, wiped my hands on a towel, and walked to the door. When I opened it, my stomach sank. There they were, my mom and dad, standing together, both looking a little older than I remembered, slightly nervous, slightly apologetic. And with them, my younger sister Emma, who had always been the golden child in their eyes. My heart raced, partly because I hadn't seen them in months and partly because I knew instinctively that nobody just shows up unannounced unless they need something. "Hi," I said cautiously. "Hey," my mom said. She smiled, but it was forced. "Can we come in?" I hesitated. I wanted to say no. I wanted to stay in my safe bubble where I had control over everything. But something about the way my dad looked, the way my sister's hands fiddled with her jacket, made me step aside. "Sure. Come in." They walked in, all of them, and it was quiet for a moment. Too quiet. I offered them chairs, but they lingered in the small living room, shifting their weight, avoiding eye contact. I went back to the kitchen and made some tea, trying to keep my voice even. "So, why are you here?" I asked when I returned with the cups. There was a pause. My mom took a deep breath. We need a favor," she said finally. I froze. A favor from them was always complicated. A favor usually meant they had messed up something and wanted me to clean it up for them. It was almost predictable. I kept my voice steady. "What kind of favor?" My dad finally spoke. "It's about the house. The mortgage is behind, and we don't have enough saved to cover it this month. We need a loan. We thought maybe you could help." I blinked. The tea I was holding felt suddenly heavy in my hands. "You want me to cover your mortgage?" I asked. "Yes," my mom said quietly. "Just for a month. We'll pay you back as soon as we can." I set the cup down on the table with deliberate care. "I see," I said. I paused, then looked at each of them. "Do you know how hard it is to work for everything you have and then get asked to give it away? To fix something you didn't break?" My sister, who had never been quiet for long, said, "It's just 1 month. It's not a big deal. You can afford it." I laughed softly, but it wasn't funny. "You're missing the point. It's not about whether I can afford it. It's about principle. I've worked for everything I have. I've built a life on my own. And now you're here, asking me to undo all of that for you, as if the years I spent proving I could stand alone don't matter at all." They all looked at me, and I realized in that moment that they expected me to cave. They expected me to take the easy path and just write a check, like it was nothing. But I couldn't. Not this time. "I'm sorry," I said. "I can't help." My mom's face fell. "But we're your family. How can you refuse?" I took a deep breath. "Because I've spent my whole life being told I couldn't do it on my own. And now I'm telling you that I can. I'm living my life. I'm responsible for myself. And if I give you money now, it's not helping you. It's letting you continue to rely on me instead of figuring things out." My dad opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "I love you, but I've made my choice. I can't undo what I've built, and I won't use my life to bail you out. You'll figure it out, like I had to figure out everything for myself." There was silence. Heavy, tense silence. My sister frowned, my mom's eyes filled with tears, my dad's shoulders slumped. I felt a twinge of guilt, but I knew in my heart that this was the right choice. I had given my family every chance to take responsibility for themselves, and they hadn't. I wasn't going to let them undo my independence. They stayed a little while longer, trying to convince me, trying to guilt me, trying to find another way to frame it. I stayed calm, repeating myself if I had to, explaining that I couldn't help, that it wasn't personal, that it was about them learning to manage their own lives. Finally, after nearly an hour, they left. My mom blew a small, frustrated whistle as she walked out the door. My dad muttered something under his breath, and my sister just looked back at me one last time before following them. After the door clicked shut, I stood there for a long time, letting the silence settle. I felt a mix of relief and sadness, a strange combination that I had learned to recognize over the years. Relief because I had not given in, not for money, not for guilt, not for appearances. Sadness because they were my family, and I wished they had learned this lesson before they needed to come begging. That evening, I cooked myself a simple dinner, sat at the table alone, and thought about how much had changed since I left home. I had learned to be independent, to make my own rules, and to rely on my own judgment. I had learned that love doesn't always mean giving in to every request, and that family sometimes doesn't know how to treat you until you set boundaries. And most importantly, I had learned that refusing a favor, even when it hurts others' feelings, doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a person who knows their worth. The next week was tense. I tried to go about my normal routine, but every time I thought about their visit, my chest tightened. I realized I hadn't anticipated the emotional fallout from saying no. It wasn't just their disappointment. It was the look on my mother's face, the quiet shame in my father's shoulders, the frustration and disbelief in Emma's eyes. I kept thinking about it while making breakfast, walking to work, even during calls with friends. For years, I had feared independence, feared leaving the nest, feared standing up for myself. But now I understood something I hadn't before. Boundaries were uncomfortable for everyone, especially the people who had never respected them before. When I called my best friend, Jamie, to vent, he listened without interruption. "So, they showed up at your door, and you said no?" he asked. "Yep," I said. "They wanted me to pay their mortgage for a month. And not just my mom, they all came, expecting me to fix their problem. And honestly, it feels like the hardest thing I've ever done." "Good for you," Jamie said. "It's hard because family guilt is powerful. But you're allowed to take care of yourself. And you did the right thing." "I know. But I also feel guilty," I admitted. "I can't shake the feeling that I'm being selfish, even though logically I know I'm not." "That's normal," he said. "You've spent your whole life being told you couldn't survive without them. Standing up for yourself will always feel weird at first. But the more you do it, the easier it gets." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "Yeah, I guess. I thought I'd feel proud or something. But right now, I mostly feel tense." "Give it time," he said. "And remember, boundaries aren't cruel. They're necessary. You're showing them how to respect you." That evening, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. The autumn air was crisp, and the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. I walked slowly, thinking about all the moments in my life when my family had doubted me. I remembered the nights I stayed up finishing school assignments because they assumed I'd fail. I remembered the dinners where they compared me to Emma, telling me I wasn't ambitious enough, that I wasn't smart enough, that I wasn't capable. And I realized that every small step I had taken on my own, renting my apartment, balancing bills, getting a stable job, building friendships, was a silent rebellion against those doubts. When I got back to my apartment, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mom. I debated opening it, but curiosity got the better of me. It said, "We understand your decision. We are disappointed, but we will figure it out ourselves. Thank you for your honesty." I stared at the screen for a long time. It wasn't exactly warm or apologetic. It was restrained, practical, but it was a step. Acknowledgement. A recognition that I wasn't obligated to bail them out. The next morning, I was getting ready for work when my phone buzzed again. This time it was Emma. "Can we talk tonight?" I considered ignoring it, but something in her tone, she had sent the message without punctuation or flair, just the words, made me respond. "Sure. When? 7 p.m.? Coffee shop near your place?" "Fine." When I arrived at the coffee shop that evening, I spotted her sitting alone at a corner table, staring at her hands. She looked nervous, smaller somehow, like the confident, self-assured sister I grew up with had been replaced by someone unsure. "Hey," I said softly as I approached. "Hey," she replied, eyes flicking up briefly before returning to her hands. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Then she finally spoke. I wanted to apologize." I raised an eyebrow. For everything," she said, voice quiet. "For believing I was better than you. For not standing up for you when Mom and Dad treated you unfairly. I don't know, making it seem like you were never enough." I blinked. I wasn't expecting this. Emma wasn't usually the type to admit fault, especially not to me. "I appreciate that," I said slowly. "Really. But it doesn't change the past." "I know," she whispered. "But maybe we can start fresh? I don't want to keep repeating the same mistakes. I see now how hard you've worked and I want to support you instead of trying to compete with you." I nodded. "Okay. That's fair. We can try that." It wasn't forgiveness yet. It wasn't trust. But it was the beginning. A crack in the wall that had separated us for years. Over the next few weeks, I kept my boundaries firm. My parents didn't call asking for money, though they did check in occasionally, cautiously, as if testing the limits. Emma started texting more, asking for advice about her own work, about budgeting, about handling challenges she had always ignored. And I began to feel something I hadn't expected, a sense of calm. I realized that independence wasn't just about surviving on my own. It was about creating relationships that didn't drain me, that didn't rely on guilt or obligation. It was about being honest with myself and with others, even when it hurt. Then, one Saturday morning, my phone rang. It was my mom. I hesitated, but I answered. "Hi," I said. "Hi, sweetie. I wanted to thank you," she said, "for being honest with us last week. I know it wasn't easy. And I want you to know, we are proud of you. Really." I felt a lump in my throat. "Thanks," I said. "You've grown so much. And we see it now. We didn't know how to give you the space you needed before." "I know," I said. "It's okay." Emma told me what she said. She continued. I hope we can keep moving forward." "I think we can," I said. Slowly. "But we can." That conversation didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the years of doubt, the comparisons, the criticisms. But it shifted something. It reminded me that independence wasn't just about walking away. It was also about teaching others how to treat you, how to respect your choices, and how to acknowledge your growth. By the end of that month, things with my family had started to change. They were hesitant, careful, sometimes awkward, but they were trying. I felt proud, not because they had learned, but because I had finally established boundaries that mattered and stuck to them. I had made it clear that I was capable, that I was strong, that I could live on my own without being drawn into their problems. And most importantly, I had proven to myself that standing up for my life and my choices didn't make me unkind. It made me resilient. From then on, I carried a quiet confidence. I still loved my family, but I no longer defined myself by their expectations or approval. I was my own person, responsible for my own life. And while they still needed help sometimes, I had learned to give it in ways that didn't compromise my independence. The lesson was clear. Growing up meant learning to say no, learning to trust yourself, and learning to love people without letting them control your life. And for the first time, I felt free, not just because I was on my own, but because I had finally learned how to stand firm in my worth, no matter who asked me to step aside. Over the next few months, the dynamic with my family continued to evolve in subtle, unexpected ways. It wasn't dramatic, and it wasn't instantaneous, but it was real. My parents stopped calling with minor emergencies or guilt-laden hints about needing money. Emma started texting more often, not just about school or work, but about life in general. It was strange at first. After years of tension, it almost felt like we were strangers trying to navigate the rules of a new friendship. But it was a good kind of strange, the kind that carried the potential to grow into something solid. One Saturday morning, I woke up early, made a cup of coffee, and sat by the window watching people walking their dogs and sipping on takeout lattes from the corner shop. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Emma. "Hey, want to go for a walk? I feel like we never really get time to talk anymore." I smiled and typed back, "Sure, let's meet at the park in an hour." When I arrived, she was already there, stretching a little as she waited. I noticed that she seemed smaller somehow, not physically, but in the way she carried herself, less confident, more reflective. I realized that years of being the golden child hadn't prepared her for independence either, and suddenly, I felt a pang of empathy. We started walking along the paths lined with trees, leaves crunching beneath our feet. "So, how's work?" I asked, starting the conversation casually. "Good," she said, shrugging. "Busy. I've been trying to manage my schedule better. You know, adulting." I laughed. "Yeah, it's a full-time job, isn't it?" She nodded. "It's weird. I thought I'd have it all figured out by now, but I'm realizing none of us really do. Except, maybe you." I raised an eyebrow. "Me? Why me?" "Because you just handle life. You make it work. You don't wait for someone to save you. You just do it." I felt a small warmth in my chest. I wanted to tell her it hadn't always been easy, that I'd made mistakes and struggled in ways she couldn't imagine, but instead I just nodded. "Thanks," I said. "I've had to figure a lot out on my own, that's all." We walked in silence for a while, the air crisp, the sun filtering through the trees. I realized that moments like this, the simple act of being present with someone, talking about life without judgment, were exactly the kind of things I had been missing with my family. And maybe, just maybe, we were starting to rebuild that in a healthier way. By the end of the walk, we were laughing at some silly memory from when we were kids, something about a prank Emma had pulled on me that had gone completely wrong. It was easy, lighthearted, and I felt a connection I hadn't felt in years. I realized that while my family had challenged me, doubted me, and tested me, the bonds weren't gone. They had just been buried under years of expectation and miscommunication. It was going to take time, but maybe we could grow past it. A few weeks later, my mom called. This time, it wasn't urgent, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loaded with guilt. It was a simple conversation. "Hi," she said warmly. "Hi," I replied, curious. "I just wanted to check in. See how you're doing. You've been busy, I know, but I wanted to hear your voice." I felt a slight hesitation. For years, conversations with her had been loaded with expectations and judgment, but this one felt different. Honest. Human. "I'm doing well," I said. "Work's busy, but I'm managing. How about you?" We talked for a while, about mundane things, weather, work, the neighborhood. I noticed that she seemed more relaxed, less defensive, and I realized she was learning too, figuring out how to communicate without turning everything into a negotiation or a guilt trip. By the end of the call, I felt content. Not happy, not ecstatic, just content. Then came the test. A few months later, my father called, his voice hesitant. "I know you've been setting boundaries, and I want to respect that. But I need advice. Something at work, something I don't know how to handle. Can you help me?" I paused. This was different. He wasn't asking for money or for me to fix a problem. He was asking for guidance, asking me to use my experience in a way that didn't compromise my independence. "Of course," I said. "Let's talk." Over the next hour, I walked him through a situation at work, suggested strategies, and listened to him vent. It was productive, and I realized that helping someone didn't always mean giving them your life or your resources. Sometimes, it meant sharing knowledge, supporting growth, and being present in a way that preserved boundaries. After the call, I reflected on how far we had all come. My family had shown up at my door months ago needing a favor I refused, and it had been one of the hardest things I had ever done. But that refusal had taught them a lesson, and it had taught me a lesson too. I had learned that standing firm didn't make me unkind, and they had begun learning that asking for help didn't entitle them to control me. I started to notice subtle changes. My parents began talking about their own goals and challenges rather than mine. Emma started seeking advice in a way that was collaborative rather than competitive. Our interactions were still imperfect, but they were grounded in respect and understanding. One evening, Emma stopped by my apartment unannounced, which was something she had never done before. She brought a bag of pastries and a nervous smile. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I replied, smiling. "Want some coffee?" "Please," she said, sitting down. We spent the evening catching up, talking about work, life, hobbies, even small triumphs and failures. There was no judgment, no comparison, No underlying tension. Just two people reconnecting. I realized that independence didn't just create space, it created clarity. It allowed us to rebuild relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation or fear. It allowed us to appreciate each other without the weight of past resentment dictating every interaction. Months passed, and the pattern continued. My family reached out for advice, for conversation, sometimes for small favors that didn't compromise my boundaries. I offered help when it felt appropriate and declined when it didn't, and in every case, I felt no guilt. They were learning, slowly, that I wasn't a resource to be exploited but a person with autonomy. One quiet Sunday morning, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea, reflecting on everything. I thought about the morning they had shown up at my door, the tension, the refusal, the heavy silence afterward. And I realized that moment had been pivotal. That moment had defined the trajectory of our relationships, had set the tone for how I would live my life, and had allowed me to grow into someone capable of standing firm while remaining compassionate. I understood finally that independence wasn't just about surviving. It wasn't just about making a life on your own. It was about learning when to say no, when to give, and when to hold your ground. It was about fostering relationships that were honest, fair, and grounded in mutual respect. And it was about teaching others, sometimes unwillingly, that you could love someone without letting them control you. And in that moment, sipping tea and listening to the quiet hum of the city outside, I felt a profound sense of peace. I had made it. They had shown up, I had refused, and through that refusal, we had all learned something essential. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was real. And that was enough. After that period of slow rebuilding, I started noticing little things in my family that felt different. Subtle changes, nothing drastic, but enough to remind me that people can learn, even when it takes years. My parents, for instance, began asking questions about my life without framing them as criticism. My dad stopped comparing me to Emma or implying that I was less capable. My mom would occasionally text to check in, not because she expected me to fix something for her, but because she genuinely wanted to know how I was doing. Emma became a different person around me too. She wasn't the same competitive, golden child sister she used to be, constantly measuring herself against me and trying to prove something to our parents. She started coming to me for advice, not to see if I could solve her problems, but to help her think through them herself. It was small, but it felt significant. I realized that independence didn't just teach me strength, it forced others to grow too. One afternoon, I received a text from Emma. "Hey, want to come with me to help pick out some furniture for my apartment? I could use your advice." I smiled and responded, "Sure, why not?" When I arrived at her apartment, she looked slightly nervous, as if she expected me to judge her choices. "I don't know if I picked the right colors," she said, fidgeting with a throw pillow. "Emma, it's your space. You like it, right? That's all that matters," I said. She nodded and smiled faintly. "I guess you're right. I'm just not used to making decisions without someone else's approval." I realized then how much she had been shaped by our parents' constant comparison and criticism. It made me appreciate even more the distance I had created for myself. The independence I had fought for wasn't just about surviving. It was about freeing myself from patterns that could control my life for decades. As we shopped, we laughed, reminisced, and argued over which chairs would match the sofa best. It was playful, normal, and it reminded me that family could be good when boundaries were respected. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just tolerated. I was appreciated, not for what I could do for them, but for who I was. That evening, Emma and I had dinner at her new place. She looked around, visibly proud, and said, "You know, I never thought I'd feel this independent. But seeing how you live your life, it inspires me. You make it look manageable." I shrugged, smiling. "It's not always easy, but it's possible. You'll figure it out too. And you're already on your way." Over the next several months, our interactions became more natural. Emma would invite me to lunch, to meet friends, or just to hang out and talk about random things. Our conversations were no longer charged with competition or judgment, they were real. I found myself enjoying her company in ways I hadn't before, appreciating her humor, her insight, and the shared experiences that only siblings understand. My parents also continued to adjust. One evening, my mom called just to chat about a new recipe she was trying. It wasn't about guilt or favor, it was simply about connection. We laughed over small kitchen disasters, and I realized how different it felt to engage with them now that I had established boundaries. It was freeing. Then came the real test. A few months later, my dad faced a significant challenge at work. He called me late one evening, sounding stressed. I don't know what to do," he admitted. "I'm worried I might lose this opportunity, and I don't know how to handle it." I listened carefully as he explained the situation. Unlike before, when he might have expected me to fix it entirely, this time he was asking for guidance. I asked questions, helped him think through strategies, and suggested ways to approach his colleagues and supervisors. He was receptive, asking for feedback rather than demanding solutions. By the end of the conversation, he sounded calmer and more confident. "Thank you," he said. "I don't know what I would have done without talking it through with you." "You wouldn't have done anything without trying," I said gently. "You just needed a little perspective." And that was the difference now. Our relationship had shifted from dependency and guilt to collaboration and respect. I realized independence wasn't just about saying no. It was about creating a framework where we could engage as equals, each responsible for our own lives. Around this time, I started inviting my family over more often, not out of obligation, but because I wanted to. Dinner became a more relaxed, enjoyable experience. Emma and I would cook together, my parents would ask about my work, and sometimes we even played board games after dinner. Nothing extravagant, nothing dramatic, just ordinary life. And it felt extraordinary precisely because it had taken so long to reach that point. One weekend, Emma and I went for a walk in the park again. She turned to me, a serious look in her eyes. "I want to thank you for standing your ground," she said. "When you refused that first favor, it was hard for me to understand. I thought you were being harsh. But now I see that it was the best thing for all of us." I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. "I didn't do it to punish anyone. I did it to protect myself. But I'm glad it helped in some way." "It did," she said. "It forced us to think about ourselves, about how we handle problems. I'm learning that I can be independent too, that I don't have to rely on you or mom or dad to figure everything out for me." I smiled. "Exactly. That's the point." As the months went by, the small moments of connection continued to accumulate. Birthdays, holidays, casual visits, they all carried a new energy, one of mutual respect rather than expectation. I started to see the transformation in my family not as a result of my forgiveness or generosity, but as a reflection of the boundaries I had set. By saying no when it mattered, I had inadvertently taught them a crucial lesson about responsibility, respect, and independence. One quiet evening, after a long day at work, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea, reflecting on everything. I thought about the day they had shown up at my door, demanding help. I remembered the tension, the frustration, the pressure. And I realized that moment had been a turning point. By refusing, I had preserved my life, my growth, and my principles. I had not only protected myself, but I had also set the stage for healthier relationships with the people I loved most. It struck me that independence wasn't a single act or a one-time choice. It was a continuous process, a daily commitment to live in a way that honored your values, your work, and your effort. It wasn't about shutting people out. It was about teaching them to engage with you as equals, not as controllers, not as critics, not as people entitled to your life. I thought about my family, their flaws, their habits, their past mistakes, and I realized I still loved them. But that love was different now. It wasn't blind or unconditional in the sense that it allowed them to dictate my life. It was conscious, deliberate, and fortified by respect. I could care deeply about them without losing myself. By the end of that year, our family had changed more than I ever expected. We laughed more, talked more, and genuinely supported each other's growth. My parents had learned to communicate without guilt or comparison. Emma had embraced her own independence, and I had discovered the profound strength of standing firm. I realized finally that saying no had not only protected me, it had transformed us all. It had shown my family that I was capable, resilient, and self-reliant. And it had shown me that independence didn't mean isolation. It meant the ability to build relationships that were fair, honest, and deeply human. Sitting there on the balcony, the city lights flickering below, I felt a quiet satisfaction. I had made it. They had shown up needing a favor I refused. And through that refusal, we had all learned something invaluable. Life wasn't perfect, and we would still face challenges. But now we could face them together, as equals, with respect, understanding, and a clear sense of who we were and what we stood for. The following months felt almost surreal in their normalcy. Family life wasn't perfect, but it had become manageable, balanced in a way I never imagined possible. My parents had stopped trying to control me, Emma had become more self-reliant, and I had learned that setting boundaries didn't make me a bad daughter or sister. It made me a better person for everyone involved. The air felt lighter in our interactions, like the tension of past expectations had been finally lifted. One Saturday afternoon, my mom called me while I was cooking lunch. "Hey," she said warmly. "I was wondering if you wanted to come over for tea. Just us. Nothing else." "Sure," I replied. I wasn't sure what to expect, but after months of growth, I felt confident that we could just enjoy each other's company. When I arrived at their house, my parents greeted me with smiles rather than tension. Emma was already there, helping my mom set the table. The sunlight streamed through the windows, casting everything in a soft, warm glow. I realized that this moment, simple, ordinary, unremarkable to anyone else, was monumental for me. It represented years of struggle, resistance, and growth finally converging into something sustainable. We sat down for tea, and for the first time, the conversation wasn't about money, favors, or comparisons. We talked about work, hobbies, and plans for the summer. I shared a story about a project I was proud of at work, and my parents listened attentively without interrupting or offering unsolicited advice. Emma laughed at some of my jokes, genuinely enjoying the moment without the usual undertone of competition. After tea, my mom looked at me with a serious expression. "I want to say something," she began. "I know I haven't always been the best parent. I let expectations, comparisons, and worry get in the way. I'm sorry for that. I see now how much pressure we put on you, and how often we underestimated you. You've shown incredible strength and independence, and I'm proud of you." I felt a lump in my throat, but I smiled. "Thank you. That means a lot. And I forgive you. We've all been learning, me included." Emma reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you too. You taught me that independence doesn't mean abandoning family. It means learning how to exist alongside them, without being consumed by guilt or expectation." I nodded, feeling a warmth in my chest I hadn't felt in years. It was strange how the hardest moments of my life, saying no when I was expected to say yes, standing firm in my choices, creating space for myself, had led to this. To peace. To understanding. The months continued to unfold with a rhythm I had longed for. We began having monthly family dinners at my place and theirs, alternating who cooked and who hosted. Emma and I occasionally went shopping together, sharing opinions and laughs. My parents sought advice when appropriate, but they no longer expected me to fix everything. One evening, after a long day at work, I sat on my balcony, sipping tea and reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. I thought about the first day they had shown up at my door needing a favor I refused. I remembered the tension, the guilt, the frustration. I remembered the fear that I might lose them or damage the relationship by saying no. And now I realized that refusal had been the turning point. It had protected me, yes, but it had also allowed my family to see me as an independent person, capable of making choices for myself. It had forced them to confront their own habits, assumptions, and expectations. It had allowed us to grow, together and individually, into healthier versions of ourselves. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the hum of the city below, and felt a sense of satisfaction I hadn't known before. I had built a life on my own terms, and in doing so, I had also rebuilt the most important relationships in my life. Love and connection were still there, but now they were grounded in respect, trust, and mutual understanding. I thought about the lessons I had learned, that independence wasn't isolation, that saying no could be an act of love, that family could change if given the chance, but only if boundaries were respected, that growth often came from discomfort, and peace from firmness. I realized that my life had been defined not just by my choices, but by the courage to make them in the face of expectation, guilt, and pressure. And finally, I understood that this was what being an adult, a fully independent person, truly meant, not just surviving, not just standing alone, but living authentically while maintaining connection. It meant making hard choices, sometimes uncomfortable, sometimes lonely, but always with integrity. Looking back, I realized I had done it. I had made it on my own, and in doing so, I had helped my family grow too. They had shown up at my door needing something I couldn't give, and in refusing, I had discovered my own strength, and helped them discover theirs. I took another sip of tea, watching the sun dip behind the buildings, and smiled. Life wasn't perfect, and we would continue to face challenges, But now we face them together, as equals, with clarity, respect, and understanding. I felt a calm I had never known, the kind that comes from living true to yourself while still caring for the people you love. And for the first time, I knew without a doubt that standing firm, refusing to compromise my independence, and trusting myself had been worth every difficult, uncomfortable, and transformative moment. I had learned that independence and connection weren't mutually exclusive, they were the foundation of a life worth living.